Our speaker today is Steve Lonegan. Steve is widely considered one of the nation's best policy debaters. He has dedicated his time in public life to fighting for the taxpayers. Steve began his career in public service when he became mayor of Bogota, New Jersey in 1996. He immediately cut municipal spending, eliminated wasteful and redundant services, privatized significant functions, and instituted a more cost-efficient, user-friendly government. In 2002, Steve introduced and passed a ballot question in Bogota that prohibited the use of eminent domain for the taking of private property for private development. The passage of this referendum has secured Bogota, New Jersey as one of the nation's safest places for private property rights. In 2003, Steve passed the Taxpayer Protection Act, a city law that prohibits the government from increasing spending in excess of inflation, required new debt to be approved by voters, and restricted salary increases awarded to any bargaining unit from exceeding inflation. This trailblazing legislation earned Steve the National Hero of the Taxpayer Award from Americans for Tax Reform. During his time as mayor, Steve led statewide campaigns on behalf of New Jersey taxpayers. Whether it was fighting the unconstitutional state bonding of Governor Whitman or Governor McGreevy's proposed gasoline tax hike, Steve was willing to take on leaders in both parties to do what was right for New Jersey's working families. In 2006, Steve joined the Americans for Prosperity Foundation as a state director of the New Jersey chapter, where he continued to fight for taxpayers and achieve a number of successes. On August 1st of 2014, Mayor Lonegan took the helm as Director of Monetary Policy for the American Principles in Action. As the head of the Fix the Dollar project, Steve is charged with the responsibility of building national grassroots support for sound monetary policy and restoring the gold standard. Mr. Lonegan earned a BA in Business Administration from William Patterson University, where he was captain of the football team and an all-conference division center. In 1981, he earned an MBA from Fairleigh Dickinson University. Prior to becoming the New Jersey State Director for Americans for Prosperity, Steve built and managed retail, custom home building, and manufacturing businesses. Steve and his wife Lorraine live in Lavallette, New Jersey, and they have two adult daughters, Brooke and Catherine. And this year on his birthday, he was blessed with his first grandchild, Alexander Stephen Perani. Yes? Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm Rotary welcome to Mr. Steve Lonegan.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Wow, it is an honor to be in South Carolina, and I hope I can succeed today in bringing the kind of value to the Rotary. By the way, I'm a Rotarian myself. So that was quite a nice introduction, so you know a little bit about me. So I'm here today to talk about something that you're all very familiar with. This little piece of paper in your hand. My hand. Probably the most piece of paper you know better than anything else if you think about it. Very well designed. It's got a picture of George Washington on it. It represents the value of our savings. It represents the value of our wages. It represents, in many ways, our achievement. It's how we trade with one another, and it's how we do business with one another. It's a measure of value in many, many ways. But there are many of us across this country today, many leaders in politics and economics, that are very concerned about what's happening to that little piece of paper in our pocket. You know, it's very... I'm honored to be in South Carolina because, interestingly enough, South Carolina led the effort in the Constitutional Convention of 1787 by Pierce Butler, Charles Pinckney, Charles Cokeworth Pinckney, and John Rutledge led the effort to stop Congress from having the right to print paper money. Pierce Butler seconded the motion by James Madison to insert a constitutional clause that says, Article 1, Section 8, that only Congress has the right to coin money and establish its value. And these four men came back to the ratifying convention in South Carolina in the months that followed and argued strenuously for that Constitution, particularly that constitutional clause. In fact, John Rutledge is credited with saying that paper money is equivalent to the mark on the head of the devil in Revelations. So the founding fathers had an adamant hatred of paper money. Why is that? Because they understood that paper money was an experiment. They had just come off of the Revolution. They had printed something called the Continental. Continental paper dollars devalued from a dollar to 1,000, being the equivalent of one paper dollar by the time the Revolution came to an end. George Washington was credited with saying he needed a carload of Continentals to buy a carload of supplies. They understood that paper money could not maintain value, and it destroyed itself. Following the Constitutional Convention of 1787, America would adopt a gold standard that would last until 1971. Now, why is this important? We're reading in the newspaper every single day how the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. It's a dominant story today in many newspapers. The income gap is widening. The income gap is widening. In fact, according to every report, the buying power of middle-income families has dropped over the last 7 years by almost 8%. Middle-income wage earners are experiencing stagnating wages and a rising cost of living that has put a squeeze on the middle class. When President Obama says the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, he is right. The rich are getting richer. Over the last 7 years, 8 years, 10 years, I think some 95% of all the money accumulated in the economic recovery has gone to less than 5% of the population. So the income gap is widening. But the income gap is not widening in this country because of free market capitalism. It's widening because of the failed monetary policies of a Federal Reserve Bank that has printed money out of thin air ad nauseum over the last decade. And this is exactly what the Founding Fathers warned us against. So let me talk to you about the history of the American coin. You know, the American, over the last several years, we've seen a number of reports from polling companies about how Americans believe that the next generation is not going to do as well as we did. For the first time in American history, Americans are saying that future generations will not have it as good as we have. This is not the American dream, folks. The American dream was that every generation does better than the one before us. That we want to see our children, my newly born grandson, have a better life than I have. I'm concerned that's exactly not what's happening, and so are most Americans. So why is that? How is the American dream slipping between our fingers? It's not because we as a nation don't have the resources, the people, the education, and the liberty. We do. But we don't have money we can rely on. And how did this happen? And I'll point to you the exact day that the American dream began to end. It was the day that President Richard Nixon ended the 180-year gold standard on which our money stood. You know, in 1968, if you walked into the bank with an American dollar bill, you could redeem it for a silver coin, worth $1 worth of silver, pure silver at the time. In 1933, you could walk into the bank with $20 and be given an ounce of gold. You knew exactly what your money was worth. But what happened? I'll tell you what happened. It was called the Nixon Shock of 1971. In a 4-minute speech to the United States of America, President Nixon effectively ended the gold standard and set America on a slow but steady downward course economically. I'd like to show his little speech. Suen, you can kick that up.
I can't get the audio to play, Steve.
Okay. It's really quite fascinating to watch. If you go to my website at Fix the Dollar, you can see President Richard Nixon's 4-minute speech, in which he announced on that night that he was temporarily ending the gold standard. Temporarily. That was 43 years ago. He also stated in his speech that night that he guaranteed that the dollar tomorrow would be worth as much as it is today. Today, the dollar is worth less than 14 cents of what it was worth in 1971. And the temporary experiment with paper money has continued. After the Continental Congress of the Constitutional Convention of 1787, America adopted under Alexander Hamilton the American Coinage Act. They determined that American coins would be made of gold and silver. $20 gold piece, $1 silver dollars would be the basic coinage of our country, in smaller denominations. But it's ineffective to think you're going to run around with gold coins or silver coins, so they developed what's called the U.S. Treasury note under Alexander Hamilton. And the U.S. Treasury note, you might remember them, because they were called U.S. Treasury notes up until 1971. If you see this picture here, you can see the gold and silver coins that are still minted today, by the way. America still mints an eagle, a gold eagle. It's a $20 face value gold coin. It's actually an ounce of gold. And you could walk into the bank with your U.S. Treasury note, and the U.S. Treasury note could be redeemed up until very recently, for something of real value. We knew exactly what it was worth. But if there's any lawyers in the office, today that U.S. Treasury note is now called a Federal Reserve note. What's a Federal Reserve note? The Federal Reserve Bank is not a federal entity. It is a private banking system. The president appoints the chairman and the governors, but it's a private entity. As far as a reserve, there are reserves that used to back your money, amount to collections of subprime mortgage portfolios, mortgage-backed securities, and treasury bonds, of which you cannot redeem your money. And the note part, well, if you're a lawyer, what is a note? A lawyer will tell you that a note has certain components. It has a payer, a payee, a date certain for redeeming that note, and a real value. The payer and the payee used to be you, the bearer of the bill, the bank being the payee, the payer. You could walk into the bank, that's the date certain, you say, Mr. Banker, I'd like my $1 worth of silver, and you would be paid $1 worth of silver in a $1 silver coin, 1960 $1 silver coin. Today, you don't redeem your note for anything, because it's backed by nothing. It's not even really a note. This is a 1960 silver dollar. If you took this 1960 silver dollar, and you took a 1960 paper dollar, and you put it in your drawer, and you took it out today, this 1960 paper dollar is still a paper dollar, but it's only worth 15 cents of what it was worth in that year. This silver coin is worth today's market about $14 in its intrinsic value in silver. In 1960, an ounce of gold bought 12.5 barrels of oil on the open market. Today, an ounce of gold buys 16 barrels of oil on the open market, but the equivalent value of American dollars to that day till now buys substantially less. So we have watched the drop in the buying power of the American dollar significantly, and we're seeing its impact as elites in Washington manipulate the power of our paper money. Here's a very simple statistics, and I don't like to hit people with a lot of statistics. America's economic growth, our GDP growth, in the 43 years prior to Nixon ending the gold standard, that would have included the Depression, World War I and World War II, the Depression, World War II, and Korea and Vietnam, stood at 4.5% average growth annually. Unemployment in that period was 4.7% for the 43 years prior to 1971. In the 43 years since Richard Nixon ended the gold standard, our GDP growth has dropped to 3.5%. Our average unemployment rate has been 5.8%. If we had maintained gold standard growth rates for the past 43 years as they stood for 100 years prior to 1971, our economy would be 50% greater today. Your average working family's income would be 50% greater. Inflation in the years prior to ending the gold standard averaged under 2%. Inflation since the end of the gold standard has exceeded 3.5%. The Bible is filled with verses and references to the sin of inflation and the debasing of currency. From Leviticus to Deuteronomy to Luke. There's a reason for that. Over the course of human history, mankind has understood that only money backed by real value and real substance can maintain its worth for those who earn it in their lifetimes. And it's not, people say to me, are Americans going to really understand this? Because we're committed, our organization, to make this an issue in the presidential election. It's time we had presidential candidates who stood up for the value and the sanctity of our money. And it's not uncommon for Americans to understand this. Gold and silver were monetary policy was critical in the elections of 1896, 1900, 1904. In fact, there's a very famous American story, metaphor, written about the gold standard. You may have heard of it. It's called The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz was written as 1900 as a metaphor on the election of 1896, and on the gold standard, Oz being an ounce of gold, the wizard being the president, the Wizard of Oz, ounce, the wizard being the president, the city of Oz being Washington, D.C., the yellow brick road representing the gold standard, Dorothy's slippers in the original book were silver, Dorothy represented the average American, the scarecrow was Midwestern farmers who wanted inflation, this Tin Man represented the union, industrial workers, and William Jennings Bryan was the lion. So Americans do understand the importance of the money. If you told an American 100 years ago that we were going to print paper money backed by nothing, they'd take a gun out and shoot you on the spot, I'm convinced. The founding fathers hated paper money. During the Constitutional Convention, Thomas Paine wrote a narrative in which he wrote that anybody engaged in politics, an elected official who engages in the printing of paper money, should be impeached and executed. They did mean business. So, in the course of human history, up until recently, every experiment in paper money has failed. Whether that was Germany during the Weimar Republic, or this picture of Hungarian workers shoveling their life savings into sewers after World War II, as recently as Zimbabwe, in which a once vibrant economy collapsed because of the printing of money. America needs to return to sound money backed by something of substance so we as Americans can maintain the value of our life savings and the value of our wages and control of our own destiny. Without that, we have placed control of our money into the hands of jugglers. Jugglers in Washington, D.C., elitists who determine how to play with our money every single day to achieve social policy issues and economic growth gains, allegedly. This past Friday, for the first time in the history of the Federal Reserve System's entire 101-year history, the Federal Reserve Chairman met with leaders of political activist groups described as the New York Times as being liberal and left-wing. This has never happened before. Politics should play no role whatsoever in what our money is and means to us. It should be ours and only ours. And political decision-making, the Federal Reserve Chairman should not be entering into political dialogue with anyone from the spectrum of politics, conservative or liberal. That's not what this is about. So we need to return America to money as good as gold. We intend to make this a key issue in the upcoming primaries for president. We want leadership in Congress and in the Senate on returning America to money as good as gold. And I hope to see, once again, South Carolina take a dynamic leadership role in making this happen. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions on the gold standard and policy. I'd be happy to take them. Thank you. Sure, I'm on for 5 minutes, yeah.
Kelly, what's the biggest obstacle in converting it back?
The biggest obstacle is just to get it done. It's a relatively easy thing to do. America has gone off the gold standard a couple of times. We went off during the Civil War, and of course, the Union went to greenbacks. The Confederacy had both of which collapsed. So we had to go back to the gold standard. We backed off the gold standard a little bit during the Cold War, and it was suspended during the War of 1812. So we can be reinitiated. And that would be done by the president announcing that at a date certain, a year or so, some point down the road, America would peg the value of its money to gold. That would give the world like a year to adjust the market value and would work that way. So the gold standard was invented by Isaac Newton in 1701, considered one of the most brilliant men in the history of mankind. And it converted England from a silver coin called the pound that would be pegged to gold. The following 100 years launched England into the most prosperous era for any country in the history of the world. We believe that can happen again for our country once more.
What does the government do with the gold that it has, say, like at Fort Knox? Does that just sit there?
Yeah, it just sits there. America is still the world's largest holder of gold, second by Germany, then Italy, then France, then China.
And what good is it doing us sitting there?
I'm glad it's there. Because we are going to return to a gold standard. It's either going to be voluntarily or by force. But as of right now, we have the world's largest reserve gold on hand. And our Fort Knox, as well as in the Federal Reserve Bank, has money in their vaults, which is usually owned by other countries. But right now, today, China is moving aggressively to buy all the gold it can. On November 30th, Switzerland will have a public referendum vote to increase its gold reserve to back their currency. So the whole world is moving on this issue, not just us.
Nope.
You see a lot of ads about buying gold. What is your opinion of buying gold in bulk or in a coin?
Look, I'm not a financial advisor. I personally want to invest my money where, may sound bizarre and people have to wrap your mind around it. I personally want to invest my money where it's going to get a return on investment. When you own gold, you have to pay to store it. It doesn't pay interest. Now, if you speculate, maybe it's a great time to buy. I feel bad for the people who bought it in 1900, but that's not what gold is. Gold, when it comes to monetary policy, is a measuring stick of value that guarantees the value of your money. Even during the period that we had the gold standard, the Federal Reserve or our Treasury kept only a marginal amount of gold on stock. The Bank of England, under Isaac Newton, maintained only 4% to 40% gold in reserve. So it's not that there's a 100% liquidity. It's a measuring stick that guarantees the value of your gold. Like I said, an ounce of gold today buys more than it did 30, 40 years ago. But the equivalent dollar value today doesn't. And so it's clear about maintaining value, if that makes sense.
George?
We hear that there's a question as to whether or not that gold is really in Fort Knox. The 1930s, last
I know.
time it was checked, and the Germans requested the return of their gold, and they were told, we'll get it to you one of these days.
I believe it is there. Yeah. There's been reports of it being. I've heard that, but I believe Goldfinger did not get away with his plot when James Bond did stop him. So, yeah. And I've been actually. It's pretty interesting. I went to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and they have these massive piles of gold. And during Hurricane Sandy up by us, when the flood actually hit that area, and it had never been flooded before, it was unguarded. People don't know this. They didn't have a locking system that worked because they had never locked the vaults. They'd always been guarded. So when they had to lock the reserve bank vaults when the flood was coming, they had no way to lock it. So it was actually left unguarded. Yeah. It's interesting. I want to just point one thing out, folks. I meant to do this. I don't use notes. Is that I went into the bank last week and asked to get a $1 coin. And this is what they gave me. Have you guys seen this? This is a piece of magnesium with a shiny finish on it. It has no value whatsoever. This is a bauble. This thing that now represents the redeemable value of our dollar is a worthless bauble. Not even worth a penny because it would cost more to melt it down. This reminds me of the Indians in Manhattan Island who fell for a bunch of shiny beads as value. As Americans, we're allowing this to be handed to us as our dollar, our value. Put this in a drawer today and see what it's worth 30 years from now. This is a joke. And we should take this very, very seriously.
One more.
Sure.
Jim?
Does the federal government have enough gold in reserve to anywhere nearly be able to back?
Yes, we actually do. And there's quite a number of academic scholars on this issue. We have enough gold in reserve to reestablish a gold standard. A gold standard is a very poetic thing. It basically establishes your value. So let's just say, like I said, on July 17th, 2018, we adopt the gold standard. The world will adopt, mines will produce gold. On that day, you'll know that your dollar is worth, $1,000 is worth an ounce of gold. And that's something you can take with you for the next 100 years. And we'll adjust accordingly to that need. And the Fed will buy what they need to buy to back it up as needed. Even during the Depression, when people did runs on banks and could have asked for gold, they took their paper money because they knew it was backed by gold. So we don't need to have 100% reserve gold value. Thank you, folks. One more thing, by the way, we have sign-up forms if you'd like to get our newsletter from Fix the Dollar every week. I appreciate it because we are trying to build a grassroots movement. It's going to be up to us to call our congressmen, our senators, and our presidential candidates and make America's money as good as gold again. So I hope you'll sign up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. We have this small token of appreciation for your time coming. Thank you. President Leavenworth, thank you for scheduling a very interesting program. Could you tell us what's going on in our next meeting?
Sure. Well, we're not going to meet next week. We're off for the Thanksgiving holiday, but on December 1st, we'll be back here at 1 o'clock to hear from Shaw Air Force Base Major General Colombo. So, see you then.
And we're going to look ahead a little bit. Mark has done a great job lining up our January calendar. Mark, do you want to just give everybody a window into what's going on in January?
Sure. We were able to, after many weeks and months of coordination, able to schedule Corporal Kyle Carpenter. January 5th, he'll be here, and so we're all looking forward to that. We also have January 12th, the Clemson president, Clements, coming, and then we hope to have a representative from Boeing also in January. So a lot to look forward to.
Thank you, Mark. And I know most of us in this room do know, but Lance Corporal Cal Carpenter is a student at USC. He was a Marine who served in Afghanistan and has been awarded the Medal of Honor. So we're really looking forward to him coming on the 5th. Jim Smithwick will close us out. Do we have a piano player? No piano player. Jim has made a great improvise. We will close with a 4-way test. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it will goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Reminder, a quick board meeting in this corner over here. Thank you.
Hey, how are you?